Thessaly hadn't planned on being trapped between a bookshelf and the chest of the most dangerous man alive. But here she was, her back pressed against cracked leather spines, her heart slamming so hard she could feel it in her teeth. And the Alpha King of Valdemir standing so close, she could count the flecks of gold buried in his storm-gray eyes. He wasn't looking at her, not really. His hands gripped the shelf on either side of her head, his knuckles bone-white, and his breath came in deep shuddering pulls like a man who had been drowning and just broken the surface. His eyes were closed, his jaw was clenched, and the sound that left his throat was not one she had ever heard a grown man make relief. Raw and staggering and almost pained in its intensity, Thessaly did not dare move. Across the room, the night scribe had frozen mid-sentence, with his quill still touching parchment. The guard by the door had his hand on his sword hilt, his face cycling through confusion and alarm at a speed that would have been funny if Thessaly's lungs hadn't completely stopped cooperating. This was not how her evening was supposed to go. 3 days ago, Master Helene had placed the book on her work table with the careful reverence the old woman reserved for things that were either very valuable or very dangerous. His Majesty acquired this at the Thornford auction, Helene had said, paid more for it than a war horse, wants it restored, rebound, and preserved. Don't damage it. The book was ancient. Hand-stitched binding in a style Thessaly hadn't seen outside of textbooks. The leather cover was cracked and water-stained, but still beautiful, stamped with symbols she didn't recognize. No title, no author. The pages inside were dense, with handwritten text in Old Valdemari, the kind of script scholars used 300 years ago. Thessaly had spent 3 days carefully separating pages that had fused together with age, treating the leather, reinforcing the spine, routine work, patient work. The kind of work she loved because it demanded her full attention and asked nothing of her in return except steady hands. Tonight, she had found the letter. It was tucked inside the spine itself, folded into a space between the leather and the binding cord, so thin and flat that she had almost missed it entirely. The paper was different from the book's pages, softer, newer by at least a century, though still old enough that the edges crumbled when she breathed on them, and the handwriting was not the same cramped scholarly script as the rest of the text. This handwriting was elegant and deliberate, each letter formed with the precision of someone who understood that words once written could not be taken back. Thessaly had unfolded it carefully, angling it toward the candle. The ink had faded to a dark amber, but the words were still legible. When the wolf inside him is dying and the throne cannot save him, look for the one who carries the thread. She will smell of old paper and green things growing. She will not know what she is, but he will know her, because, when she is near, the burning will stop, and the beast that is eating him alive will for a little while fall silent. Thessaly had read it twice, her brow furrowed. It sounded like a passage pulled from a myth, a fragment of a longer letter with no greeting and no signature. Strange, but not unheard of. People tucked things into old books constantly. Flowers, shopping lists, love notes to people who had been dead for 100 years. She had been reading it a third time, mouthing the words. When the archive door opened, King Soren Viel did not enter rooms. He overtook them. The air changed the moment he stepped through the doorway, thickening with a presence so overwhelming it made the candle flames stutter. Thessaly had seen him exactly twice before in her life, both times from a safe distance across a crowded hall, and both times her wolf had done something it never did. It had paid attention. Now he was walking toward her, and every step he took made the space feel smaller. He looked terrible. That was the first thing she noticed, and immediately felt guilty for thinking. His face was drawn tight, the skin beneath his eyes bruised dark, and there was a rigidity in his jaw that spoke of pain, held so long it had become structural, part of the way he was built. He hadn't seen her yet. His gaze moved across the shelves, unfocused, the way a man looked when he was walking, not because he had a destination, but because standing still was worse. Then he got close. 10 feet. 5. 3. The rigid line of his shoulders loosened. The muscle jumping in his jaw went still. His stride faltered, then stopped entirely, and his eyes widened with something she could only describe as shock. His gaze found her. Thessaly opened her mouth to greet him, to bow, to do any of the things a palace bookbinder was supposed to do when the Alpha King materialized 3 feet away in a darkened archive at 11 at night. None of those things happened. Because King Sorenvile took one more step toward her, and his knees buckled. He caught himself on the bookshelf. Both hands slammed against the wood on either side of her head, and suddenly, he was everywhere, his chest inches from hers. His breath falling against her hair, his scent flooding her senses so completely that her wolf surged forward with a force that nearly knocked her sideways. "Don't move," he said through his teeth. His voice was low and rough and scraped raw. "Whatever you're doing, don't stop." Thessaly's lips parted. "I'm not doing anything," she whispered. He didn't answer. His breathing deepened. His forehead dipped until it nearly touched the shelf behind her, and the sound he made, quiet and broken and desperately grateful, turned something over in her chest that she did not know how to put back. The night scribe stared. The guards stared. Thessaly stared at the hollow of the king's throat and tried to remember how breathing worked. Minutes passed. She lost count of them and resorted to tracking time by heartbeat because her brain had stopped being useful for anything else. Then footsteps sounded, quick and controlled, from the corridor. "Your Majesty." The voice belonged to a tall, sharp-eyed man with a face that gave away absolutely nothing. Thessaly recognized him. Carden, the king's beta, his shadow. The man who, according to palace whispers, had not smiled once since the Ashenmere campaign. Carden took in the scene. The king braced against the bookshelf, the nobody bookbinder flattened beneath him, the letter still clutched in her trembling fingers. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, calculating and fast. "Interesting," Carden said quietly. The king pulled back. The absence of his warmth hit Thessaly like a door slamming shut, and she watched his face change as the distance grew between them. The pain returned. She could see it settle back into him like water, filling a well, tightening his jaw, dimming whatever brief and desperate light had surfaced in his eyes. He looked at her then, really looked at her. And the expression on his face was not anger, or embarrassment, or any of the things she had braced herself for. It was hunger. And beneath the hunger, a fear so raw it made her stomach drop. "What is your name?" King Soren asked. "Thessaly," she managed. "I restore books." He stared at her for one long, terrible, electric moment. "Give me the letter," Carden said softly from the doorway. And, the way he said it, told Thessaly that whatever she had just stumbled into was far, far bigger than a strange note in an old book. The walk back to her quarters took 7 minutes. Thessaly knew this because she counted every single step, and there were 412 of them, and each one felt like walking further into a dream she couldn't wake up from. Carden had taken the letter. He had folded it carefully, slipped it into his coat, and told her she was dismissed for the evening. He had not explained anything. The king had not spoken again. He had simply stood there by the bookshelf, one hand pressed flat against the wood, breathing like a man trying to hold himself together, and watched her leave with those impossible gray eyes. Thessaly had bowed. She thought she had bowed. She might have curtsied, she might have tripped. The details were already blurring together into a mess of adrenaline and confusion, and the lingering ghost of his scent still clinging to her skin. She made it to her room, closed the door behind her, leaned against it, and slid to the floor. "What just happened?" she asked the empty room. The empty room did not answer. Her mind did, though helpfully, and at great speed. The king had some kind of episode in the archives. He had pinned her to a shelf. He had told her not to move. He had made a sound that she was absolutely certain no one outside his most trusted inner circle had ever heard. And Carden, the man who showed less emotion than a stone wall, had looked at her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. "I'm going to be dismissed," Thessaly whispered. "Or imprisoned. Or both." She pressed her palms against her eyes. She could still feel the phantom warmth of him along her front, could still smell pine and iron and something deeper that made her wolf pace beneath her skin in restless circles. "Stop it," she told her wolf. "He is the king. We are nobody." Her wolf did not stop. Thessaly pulled herself off the floor, changed into her nightgown with mechanical movements, and crawled into bed. She stared at the ceiling. The ceiling offered no comfort. She replayed every second. The way he had walked through the archives without purpose, the exact moment his body had changed, that visible loosening, like armor being unbuckled. The way his knees had given out, and his hands had hit the wood, and his face had gone slack with something she could only call salvation. Nobody was supposed to see that. She was sure of it. And yet she had been standing right there, close enough to feel his breath, close enough to watch the pain leave his eyes like a tide pulling back from shore. Without the pain, he had looked younger. That was the word her traitorous brain supplied. And beautiful. But she wasn't going to think about that. She was going to think about practical things instead, like whether the palace had a dungeon and whether dungeon cells came with reading light. Because surely that was where she was headed. They were going to lock her up for making the king vulnerable in front of witnesses, for seeing something she was never meant to see, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong letter in her hand. The letter. Those words circled back to her, in the dark, persistent, and strange. "When the wolf inside him is dying, she will not know what she is." A coincidence, surely. Old words in an old book with no connection to anything real. But the king had felt something when he was near her. That was undeniable. And the letter had described exactly what she had witnessed. "She will smell of old paper and green things growing." Thessaly lifted her wrist to her nose and inhaled. She smelled like binding glue, and the chamomile soap Helene made her use to keep her hands soft for delicate restorations. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that should bring a king to his knees. Sleep came in fragments, and what filled the gaps was worse. Her mind constructed elaborate disaster scenarios, with the enthusiasm of a playwright who had been given unlimited funding. In one, she was dragged before the royal court and charged with crimes she couldn't name. Illegal proximity to the sovereign, the magistrate announced. Unauthorized shelf entrapment. Possession of a suspicious letter. The king sat on his throne and watched the proceedings with that terrible, hungry expression. "She smells like old paper," he told the court, as though that explained everything. In another, Carden appeared in her room at dawn and informed her that her position had been terminated, her quarters reassigned, and that she had exactly 1 hour to vacate the palace grounds. "But my restoration work," Dream Thessaly protested. "The binding isn't finished." "Neither is your reputation," Dream Carden replied, and even in her imagination, his face betrayed nothing. Thessaly woke with her blanket twisted around her ankles, her heart hammering, and a crick in her neck from sleeping, with her entire body clenched like a fist. The morning light was pale and thin when the knock came. She opened the door to find a palace guard with a face so carefully blank it could have been carved from marble. "Miss Thessaly," the guard said, "you are requested immediately." "Requested by whom?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "The king's beta," the guard replied. "He said to tell you it isn't optional." The room Carden brought her to was not the archives. It was a study on the upper floor of the East Wing, a part of the palace Thessaly had never set foot in. The walls were lined with maps. A fire burned low in the grate. Morning light fell through tall windows in pale, angular shafts that illuminated dust motes drifting through the air like tiny lost things. The king sat behind a heavy oak desk, his head bent over a stack of correspondence. He did not look up when she entered. He did not acknowledge the door opening, or Carden's quiet announcement of her arrival, or the sound of her shoes on the stone floor. He looked worse than last night. That was the thought Thessaly couldn't stop, the one that pushed past her fear and her confusion and settled beneath her ribs with uncomfortable weight. The bruises beneath his eyes had darkened. His jaw was set so hard she could see the muscle straining. His hand gripped the pen with the controlled precision of someone using focus as a barricade against something much worse. "Here," Carden murmured beside her, gesturing to a chair positioned against the far wall. "Sit." Thessaly sat. The chair was stiff and uncomfortable, and roughly 30 feet from the king's desk. She folded her hands in her lap and tried to make herself small. "Is this about last night?" she whispered to Carden. The beta's expression revealed nothing. "Just sit," he repeated, "and wait." So Thessaly sat and waited. The fire crackled. A clock somewhere in the room ticked with mechanical indifference. The king turned a page, wrote something in the margin, turned another page. He gave no sign that he knew she was there. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe this was Carden's doing entirely. Maybe she had been placed here as some kind of observation without the king's knowledge or consent, and when he finally noticed her, sitting in the corner of his private study, like a stray cat that had wandered in through an open window, he would be furious. 10 minutes passed. Thessaly counted each one by the clock's ticking. Her hands ached from gripping each other. At the 15-minute mark, the king's pen slowed, not stopped. Just slowed, the way a river's current eases before the water goes still. He blinked, long and slow, and some of the rigid tension in his shoulders released. Thessaly's breath caught. At 20 minutes, his posture shifted. The iron rod stiffness in his spine softened into something that looked almost natural. His grip on the pen loosened. He exhaled, long and deliberate, and the sound carried across the room like a held breath finally released. He still hadn't looked at her, but Thessaly could see it happening. The same thing as last night, unfolding in slow motion instead of all at once. The pain was leaving him. Not suddenly, not like a switch being thrown, but gradually, like dawnlight pushing back the dark. The lines around his eyes smoothed, his jaw unclenched, his breathing deepened into something that didn't sound like it cost him anything. She glanced at Carden. The beta stood motionless by the door, his sharp eyes fixed on the king, and on his face, for the first time since she had ever seen him, was an expression that looked dangerously close to hope. At the 30-minute mark, an advisor entered with a report on Border Patrol rotations. The king responded with clear, unhurried authority, his voice steady and strong, absent the strained rasp she had heard last night. He asked questions. He gave orders. He sounded like a man who was not fighting his own body for every word. A second advisor arrived with trade documents, then a third with a territorial dispute. The king handled each one with the kind of sharp, efficient focus that Thessaly imagined he had been famous for before. Whatever was wrong with him started. She watched him work and realized she was seeing something private, something the people in this room probably hadn't witnessed in a long time. The king, functioning without visible pain. An hour passed. Then two. Thessaly's back ached from the stiff chair. Her stomach growled once, loud enough to make the second advisor glance at her, and she wanted to dissolve into the stone floor. But she did not move. Because every minute she sat there, the king looked more like himself, or at least more like the version of himself she imagined existed before the drawn face and the bruised eyes and the jaw that never unclenched. Finally, Carden crossed the room and bent to murmur in her ear, "You can go." Thessaly stood on stiff legs and moved toward the door. She was halfway through it when the king's voice stopped her. "Thessaly," she turned. He was looking at her. Actually looking, not through her, not past her, but at her. And the expression on his face was so layered she couldn't begin to untangle it. Gratitude. Yes. And confusion. And that same deep, unguarded hunger she had seen last night, the kind that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with desperation. "Thank you," he said. "Just that. Nothing else." Thessaly nodded, not trusting her voice, and fled. Carden caught up with her in the corridor before she made it to the staircase. She had expected questions, maybe an explanation, maybe a warning. What she got was worse. "The king hasn't been free of pain in 2 years," the beta said, falling into step beside her. His voice was low and measured, but underneath the control, there was something urgent pushing through. "Not for a single minute. Not with any healer, any tonic, any remedy we've tried. 2 years of constant, unrelenting agony." Thessaly's steps slowed. 2 years? "His wolf is dying," Carden continued, and the words landed like stones dropped into still water. "Something is consuming it from the inside. It's slow and it's relentless, and every healer who has examined him has said the same thing, that, when the wolf goes completely silent, the king will follow." Thessaly stopped walking. The corridor felt suddenly too narrow, the air too thin. "How long does he have?" she heard herself ask. Carden's pause was brief but devastating. "Months, maybe less." He studied her face with those sharp, unreadable eyes. "You sat in that room for 2 hours, and his pain stopped entirely. His wolf surfaced for the first time in 7 months. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Thessaly stared at him. The weight of it pressed down on her, enormous and suffocating. "I need you back here tonight," Carden said. "Same arrangement. Don't speak of this to anyone. And bring the book you were working on." He paused at the top of the staircase. The letter mentioned a thread. "I intend to find out what that means, and until I do, you don't leave this palace." He walked away before she could respond. Thessaly stood alone in the empty corridor, her pulse hammering, and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Because 3 days ago, she had been nobody, a bookbinder, with no family, no pack, no name worth remembering. And now, the most powerful man in the realm was dying. And somehow, impossibly, inexplicably, she was the only thing keeping him alive. Thessaly found Helene in the lower archives, seated at the long oak table, where the old woman did her most serious thinking. The table was covered in open texts, leather-bound volumes pulled from shelves that most people in the palace didn't know existed. Helene's reading spectacles were perched on the tip of her nose, and her fingers were stained with the particular shade of blue-black ink she used when she was cross-referencing something important. "Sit down," Helene said, without looking up, "and close the door." Thessaly closed the door. She sat. Her hands were shaking, and she pressed them flat against the table to keep them still. "Carden came to see me this morning," Helene said. "Before he summoned you." She removed her spectacles and fixed Thessaly with a gaze that could have stripped paint from stone. "Tell me everything that happened last night. Don't leave anything out." So Thessaly told her, the letter, the king's arrival, the way his body had changed when he got close, the bookshelf, the sound he made, the way the pain had returned the moment he stepped away. Helene listened without interrupting, which was unusual. The old woman had opinions about everything and expressed them freely, loudly, and often. Her silence now was more unsettling than any lecture. "And this morning," Helene prompted when Thessaly finished. "Carden put me in a room with the king for 2 hours," Thessaly said. "I just sat there. I didn't do anything. But the king's pain stopped while I was in the room. It started again after I left." She swallowed. "Carden says his wolf is dying. He says the king has months to live." Helene's jaw tightened. "He told you that much then?" "You knew?" Thessaly asked, her voice rising. "You knew the king was dying and you didn't tell me?" "I knew," Helene replied, "as does every senior healer in this palace. We have been trying to find a cure for 2 years, child. 2 years of searching through every text, every remedy, every piece of old knowledge in these archives. She gestured at the books spread before her. Nothing has worked. The curse was designed to resist intervention. Curse? Thessaly repeated. Helene leaned back in her chair and studied her apprentice with an expression that Thessaly couldn't read. It was somewhere between pity and calculation, and neither felt comfortable. During the Ashenmere campaign, Helene began carefully. The king was forced to destroy a settlement called Greymark. It was a pack that had been corrupted, turned feral by dark magic. They were attacking villages, killing families in the borderlands. The king tried negotiation. He tried containment. When everything else failed, he marched on Greymark, and the fighting was brutal. Thessaly's stomach turned. She had heard rumors about Ashenmere. Everyone had. But rumors were distant, abstract things. This was the first time someone had spoken about it as fact. The pack's elder, a woman named Vela, laid a curse on the king before she died. A blood curse, spoken through a dying breath. She turned his own wolf against him, made it consume itself from the inside. Helene's voice was clinical, but her eyes were not. The pain is constant. It never stops. The wolf grows weaker every day, and when it finally dies, the king dies with it. Thessaly felt the room tilt slightly. And nobody can break it? Nobody has been able to, Helene corrected. Until apparently, you walked into a room and did what 2 years of healers and scholars could not. The silence that followed felt enormous. Carden wants to know why, Helene continued. So do I. She pulled one of the open books toward her and turned it so Thessaly could see the page. The text was Old Valdemari, similar to the writing in the auction book, and a passage had been underlined in Helene's blue-black ink. Threadkeepers, Helene said. An old concept, extremely rare. Perhaps 1 in 100,000 wolves carries the trait, if the old records can be trusted. A threadkeeper produces a particular resonance, a kind of living frequency that can reach a wolf in distress and anchor it, calm it, hold it in place when something is trying to tear it loose. Thessaly stared at the underlined passage. And you think that's me? The letter you found described it almost exactly, Helene said. Old paper and green things, growing a person who wouldn't know what she was. Someone whose presence alone could silence the thing that was killing him. She paused. That letter wasn't random, Thessaly. Someone who understood what you are placed it in that book, deliberately. The implication landed like a stone in her stomach.
Who?
Helene shook her head slowly. I don't know. The handwriting isn't in any record I've found, but whoever wrote it knew. They knew about the trait, they knew about the curse, and they knew you would be the one to find that letter. Thessaly's mouth went dry. The room felt too small, suddenly the shelves too close, the air too thick with old dust and implications she wasn't ready to hold. That's not possible, she said. Nobody knows me, I don't have a family, I don't have a pack. I was left at the village gate as an infant with nothing but a blanket and no note. Nobody knew I existed, let alone what I might be. And yet someone did, Helene replied. Someone who knew enough to hide that letter inside a book that would eventually need a restorer's hands. The thought made Thessaly's skin prickle with something between wonder and unease. She had spent her entire life being invisible. The quiet girl in the archives. The orphan with no surname. The apprentice who was talented with damaged pages and utterly unremarkable in every other way. The idea that someone out there had known what she was, had planned for her, had placed a letter like a seed and waited for it to bloom, felt like discovering a hidden room in a house she thought she knew. You're more than what you think you are, Helene said firmly, whether you're ready to hear it or not. She stood and began gathering the books into a stack. Carden wants you in the king's chambers every evening from now on. The arrangement is being formalized. In his chambers? Thessaly's voice cracked. Helene gave her a look. The closer you are, the stronger the effect. You saw it yourself. 30 feet of distance, and it took 15 minutes. 3 feet, and it was instant. She stacked another book. If we want to keep the king alive long enough to find a real cure, you need to be near him as close as possible, for as long as possible. Thessaly opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Every evening, she repeated weakly. Every evening, Helene confirmed. Starting tonight. The guard who escorted Thessaly to the king's chambers that evening walked 3 paces ahead and did not speak a single word. She appreciated this, because if he had tried to make conversation, she would have either thrown up or burst into tears, and neither felt appropriate for the occasion. The king's chambers were on the highest floor of the east wing, behind a set of carved oak doors that were twice her height. The guard knocked once and stepped aside. "Enter," came the king's voice from within. Thessaly pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was enormous. Stone walls softened by heavy tapestries, a fireplace large enough to stand in, bookshelves lining one wall, weapons mounted on another. And in the center of it all, impossible to ignore, the bed. It was the largest piece of furniture she had ever seen, draped in dark linen, and the sight of it made her heart rate do something medically concerning. He was standing by the window, silhouetted against the last light of the day, when the door opened. He turned. Their eyes met, and Thessaly felt her wolf lunge forward against her ribs so hard it stole her breath. She gripped the doorframe. "Your Majesty," she started, and then every rational thought she had prepared dissolved. "I want you to know that I am a professional." The king frowned. "I didn't suggest otherwise. And I have very strong boundaries," Thessaly continued, because apparently her mouth had declared independence from her brain. "I am here in a strictly restorative capacity. Book restoration. That is what I do. I restore." A beat of silence. "I'm aware of your occupation," Soren said slowly. Thessaly looked at the bed, looked away from the bed, looked at the fireplace instead. "Of course, I just wanted to establish that clearly for the record." "Noted," the king said. Something shifted in his expression. Too quick to catch there and gone. Carden appeared from a side door, carrying a folding table and a wooden case. He set the table near the window, 6 feet from the king's desk, and placed the case on top of it. Inside were Thessaly's restoration tools, her leather rolls, her brushes, her bone folders, and beside them, the auction book. "Your workstation," Carden said, with the calm efficiency of a man who had thought of everything. "You'll work on the book's restoration here each evening, while the king attends to his correspondence. Proximity is the objective. Nothing more, nothing more." Thessaly clung to those 2 words like a drowning woman clutching a rope. She sat at the folding table, arranged her tools with the meticulous precision of someone who needed to do something with her hands, or risk losing her mind entirely. She opened the auction book to the page she had been working on before the letter had disrupted everything. The king returned to his desk. Silence settled over the room, thick, charged, unbearable. Thessaly picked up her bone folder and began carefully separating a fused page. Her hands trembled. She willed them to stop. They did not stop. She could feel him across the room. It wasn't just awareness. It was something physical. A pull in her chest, a warmth spreading outward from somewhere beneath her sternum. Her wolf had gone utterly still, not pacing, not restless, just present and attentive in a way it had never been before. The room smelled like him, pine and iron and old leather, and beneath it all, something warmer, something that made her wolf press forward against her ribs with quiet, desperate recognition. Thessaly swallowed hard and focused on the page beneath her hands. 5 minutes passed. She heard his pen slow. 10 minutes. His breathing changed, deepened. The sound of a body remembering what it felt like to exist without fighting itself for every heartbeat. Thessaly kept her eyes on the book. She smoothed a crease in a page that was 3 centuries old, and tried not to think about the fact that she could hear his heartbeat from 6 feet away. That shouldn't have been possible, not at this distance. Not for someone with her unremarkable hearing. But there it was, steady and strong and slowing, as the tension left his body. She found herself matching her breathing to his, without deciding to. A strange unconscious synchronization that she noticed only after it had already happened. Her own heartbeat slowed. The trembling in her hands went still. For the first time since this impossible situation had begun, she felt something close to calm. At 20 minutes, she risked a glance. His pen had stopped. His eyes were closed. His head rested against the high back of his chair, and his face was transformed. The carved lines of pain smoothed into something open and unguarded, and so profoundly weary that it made her throat tighten. He was not asleep. She could tell by his breathing. He was simply sitting in the absence of pain, existing in it, the way someone might stand in sunlight after a long winter. Thessaly looked back at the book before he could catch her staring. But something on the page made her freeze. The text. The cramped, faded old Valdemary script that she had been staring at for 3 days without comprehension. It was glowing, not brightly, not obviously, but the ink had taken on a faint luminescence, a warm amber light that pulsed gently, almost like breathing. Thessaly stared at it, blinked, looked again. The glow was still there, faint but undeniable, and it was strongest on the page nearest her fingertips. She lifted her hand. The glow dimmed. She placed her fingers back on the page. Her heart hammered. She looked across the room at the king. His eyes were still closed. He hadn't seen it. She looked at the glowing text beneath her fingers and felt something deep inside her shift. A door opening. A key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. She closed the book carefully, silently, and did not mention what she had seen. But her mind was racing. The letter, the thread, the text that glowed when she touched it in his presence. Something was happening between her and this book. Something connected to whatever she did to ease his pain. And she was not ready to name it yet. That night, when Carden came to escort her out, the king opened his eyes and watched her leave. He didn't speak, but his gaze followed her all the way to the door, and the weight of it pressed against her back like a hand she couldn't shake off, like a warmth she didn't want to. The days folded into a pattern. Each evening, Thessaly arrived at the king's chambers as the sun dropped below the palace walls. She set up her tools at the folding table. She opened the auction book. She worked in silence while the king worked at his desk, and somewhere in the quiet space between them, his pain receded and his wolf grew still. It was, by any reasonable measure, the strangest arrangement in the history of the Valdemar court. A bookbinder and a king, sitting in companionable silence every evening, doing their respective work while something invisible and unexplainable hummed in the air between them. Thessaly noticed the small things first. On the third evening, a cushion appeared on her chair. It was the kind of cushion that belonged in a palace sitting room, not on a folding chair in a king's study, and it was exactly the right thickness to stop her lower back from aching. "The cushion is new," Thessaly observed as she sat down. Soren didn't look up from his documents. "Is it?" On the fifth evening, a pot of tea appeared on her work table. It was chamomile, which was her favorite, and it was still warm, which meant someone had timed its delivery precisely. "Thank you for the tea," she said. "I didn't arrange for tea," the king replied. "It's chamomile," Thessaly pointed out. "My favorite. Someone would have had to ask to know that." The tips of his ears went faintly red. Thessaly bit back a smile and said nothing more about it. On the seventh evening, she found a better lamp on her table. The kind with a polished brass reflector that cast clean, even light without flickering. The kind that every book restorer dreamed about, and none could afford. "This is an Ellender lamp," Thessaly said, unable to keep the awe from her voice. "These cost more than I make in a year." "It was in storage," Soren said flatly. "No one was using it." Thessaly ran her fingers along the polished brass and felt something warm bloom in her chest. She didn't argue. The silence between them had changed. In the beginning, it had been rigid and uncomfortable. Two strangers locked in a room together, by circumstance and obligation. Now it was something softer, easier, the kind of silence that didn't demand to be filled. But Thessaly filled it anyway. It started accidentally. She was working on a particularly stubborn page that had been water damaged and then repaired badly by someone a century ago who clearly believed that more paste was always the answer. She muttered her frustrations under her breath, a running commentary on the incompetence of past restorers, and didn't realize she was speaking aloud until she heard the king's pen stop. She froze. "Sorry, I talk to books sometimes." "It's a habit." "What did this one do?" Soren asked. Thessaly blinked at him, startled. It was the first time he had initiated a conversation that wasn't strictly necessary. "Someone in the last century tried to repair this page with fish glue," she said. "Fish glue. On vellum. It's like using mud to fix a window. And they used so much of it that the page is now essentially welded to the one beneath it. And if I'm not extremely careful, 300 years of text is going to come apart. In my hands." She paused, suddenly self-conscious. "Yeah? That's probably not interesting to anyone. But me. Go on," the king said. So she did. She told him about the book's construction, the way the original binder had stitched the signatures with a herringbone pattern that she had only seen in one other text. She told him about the ink, which was made from oak gall and iron, and had survived centuries, because whoever mixed it understood the chemistry perfectly. She told him about the symbols on the cover that she had been researching, old Valdemari marks that predated the current writing system by at least 200 years. Soren listened. He asked questions, quiet ones that proved he was paying attention. When she described the herringbone stitching pattern, he asked if it was stronger than the standard binding. When she explained the ink composition, he asked why modern ink didn't last as long. Thessaly forgot to be nervous. For 20 minutes she was just a restorer, talking about the things she loved to someone who was genuinely listening, and it was wonderful. "You love this work," Soren said at one point, and it wasn't a question. "More than anything," Thessaly admitted. "Books are the only things that ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere." The words came out before she could stop them, more honest than she had intended, and the brief silence that followed felt exposed. She busied herself with a brush. "I understand that," Soren said quietly. "Just that. Nothing more." But the way he said it, low and certain, and stripped of anything performative, made her believe him entirely. That night, he fell into a painless rest in his chair, for the first time. Not unconsciousness. Not the desperate surrender she had seen before. Just rest. His breathing evened out. His face softened. His hand lay open on the desk, palm up, relaxed in a way she had never seen it. Thessaly worked by the light of her beautiful lamp and listened to him breathe and felt something settle inside her own chest. Something warm and dangerous and entirely too close to tenderness. The next morning, Helene was waiting for her in the lower archives, with an expression that meant either a breakthrough or trouble. "I've been studying the book's text," Helene said, without preamble. "The sections you've uncovered so far. Some of it is herbal lore, some of it is territorial history. But there's a chapter near the back, one of the pages you haven't separated yet, that appears to be about threadkeeper bonds specifically." Thessaly's pulse quickened. "What does it say?" "From what I can read through the damaged pages, the bond between a threadkeeper and a cursed wolf operates on proximity. The closer the threadkeeper is to the afflicted wolf, the stronger the anchoring effect." Helene paused. "But proximity alone isn't enough. The text suggests that sustained physical contact amplifies the effect dramatically. That without direct contact, the threadkeeper can ease the pain, but cannot reach the wolf itself. Cannot truly anchor it." Thessaly stared at her. "You're saying I need to touch him?" Helene's expression was carefully neutral. "I'm saying the book suggests that the current arrangement, sitting 6 feet apart in his chambers, is keeping him comfortable, but not healing him. If you want to actually reach his wolf, to anchor it and stop the deterioration, you would need to be significantly closer. How much closer? Thessaly asked, though she already knew the answer from the way her stomach had bottomed out. Helene met her eyes steadily. The text describes the Threadkeeper remaining in continuous contact throughout the night. The bond strengthens during rest, when the wolf is most vulnerable to the curse. Thessaly felt the blood rush to her face. You want me to sleep in his chambers. I want to keep the king alive, Helene replied evenly. What that requires is between you, His Majesty, and whatever arrangement you can negotiate without either of you combusting from sheer awkwardness. She paused. Though I suspect the awkwardness will be considerable. Thessaly put her face in her hands. Through her fingers she mumbled, "He's going to hate this idea." On the contrary, Helene said, "I believe Carden is informing him as we speak, and I believe the king will agree, because he is dying, and he knows it. And you are the only thing standing between him and a grave." She gathered her notes. "Tonight, Thessaly, bring a change of clothes." A narrow cot had been set up 3 feet from the king's bed. It was dressed with clean linen and a thick wool blanket, and it looked, Thessaly thought, like a very comfortable place to lie rigid with terror for 8 hours. She stood in the doorway in her nightgown, clutching a change of clothes and the auction book to her chest like a shield, and tried to convince herself that this was a completely normal thing, that completely normal people did. Sleep in the Alpha King's chambers, 3 feet from his bed while he was in it. Soren was already in the room, standing near the fire with his back to her. He was wearing a loose linen shirt, unlaced at the throat, and when he turned at the sound of the door, the firelight caught the column of his neck and the sharp line of his jaw, and Thessaly's wolf did something that felt dangerously close to a whimper. "I brought the book," she announced, holding it up as evidence. "I thought I could continue the restoration while you rest." "Purely professional. Work-related. At midnight," Soren said. "I'm very dedicated to my craft." The ghost of something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but close enough that her stomach flipped. Thessaly crossed to the cot, set down her things, and sat on the edge. The mattress was thin, but adequate. She could work with this. She could absolutely work with this. She would lie here, he would lie there, and their respective wolves would behave themselves, and in the morning she would leave and pretend that none of this was strange. "Do you usually sleep with the fire lit?" she asked, arranging her blanket with excessive precision. "I don't usually sleep at all," Soren replied. He said it flatly, without self-pity, the way someone might report the weather. Thessaly's chest tightened. She opened the auction book across her lap, angling it toward the firelight. The pages she had been working on this week were from the section Helene had mentioned, the chapter on Threadkeeper bonds. The text was badly damaged, but increasingly legible as she cleaned and separated the pages. "I could read to you," she offered, surprising herself. "From the book, some of these passages are actually quite interesting." Soren's eyebrows rose slightly. "You want to read to me. The text seems to respond when I read it aloud near you," Thessaly admitted, the ink close. "I think the book is connected to what's happening between us, and I think reading it might strengthen the effect." She expected skepticism. Instead, he studied her for a long moment, then moved to his bed and lay down. He didn't remove the shirt. He didn't get under the covers. He just lay on top of the linen, his arms at his sides, staring at the canopy above him. "Read then," he said. Thessaly found the passage she had been working on and began. The old Valdemiri was difficult, and she translated haltingly, stumbling over words whose meanings she had to guess from context. But as she read, the text began to glow beneath her fingers, warm amber light pulsing in time with her voice. The words described the Threadkeeper bond in language that was part scholarship and part poetry, how the Threadkeeper's presence created a resonance that could reach even the most damaged wolf, how proximity amplified the effect, how the thread itself was not something the keeper created, but something she was woven into her being from birth. She read for 20 minutes. At some point, she looked up and found him watching her. Not the ceiling. Her. His gray eyes were open and fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Don't stop," he said quietly. She didn't stop. She read until her voice grew hoarse, and somewhere, in the quiet rhythm of words and firelight, his eyes closed, his breathing deepened, his face softened into that unguarded expression she had come to recognize as the absence of pain. Thessaly lowered her voice to barely a whisper, reading more slowly, stretching each sentence. She didn't want to stop, didn't want to break whatever fragile spell the book had woven around them. Her own eyes grew heavy. The fire was warm. The words blurred on the page. She blinked, tried to focus, blinked again. She woke in the dark. The fire had burned to embers. The book lay closed on the cot where it had slipped from her fingers. She was in his bed. Thessaly's heart slammed against her ribs. She was lying on her side facing him, so close she could feel his breath against her forehead. His arm was draped across her waist, heavy and warm, and at some point during the night, either she had moved to him or he had moved to her, and neither of them had woken up. His face in sleep was devastating. All the tension stripped away, all the guarded control dissolved, leaving something raw and open and heartbreakingly young. She should move. She needed to move. But his arm tightened when she shifted, a reflexive pull that pressed her closer, and a low sound escaped his throat that was more wolf than man. Thessaly stopped breathing. His wolf. She could feel it. Not just his arm around her waist, not just the heat of his body, but something beneath the surface. A presence reaching toward her through his skin, desperate and grateful, and clinging to whatever she was giving it, like a drowning creature clutching air. Tears pricked her eyes. She didn't move. She lay perfectly still and let his wolf hold on to her. And when his breathing deepened again into something peaceful, she closed her eyes and stayed. In the morning, she woke alone. He was standing by the window, dressed, his back to her. But his hand was trembling where it gripped the windowsill. "I apologize," he said, without turning. "I moved in my sleep. It won't happen again." "You don't need to apologize," Thessaly said. Softly, he turned. The look on his face was so conflicted, it made her ache. Gratitude and shame, and something fiercer. Something he was clearly fighting with everything he had. "Yes," he said. "I do." He left the room before she could respond. Thessaly couldn't stop thinking about his wolf. Not the king, the wolf. The desperate, dying thing she had felt reaching for her in the dark, pressing against his skin from the inside, like a hand against glass. It haunted her through the days, through her work in the archives, through meals she barely tasted, and conversations she couldn't follow. Her own wolf was changing too. The quiet, docile creature that had lived inside her for 23 years without causing trouble was suddenly awake, alert, straining toward something she couldn't name with an urgency that bordered on physical pain. She felt him, now, even when they were apart. Not clearly, not the way she could when they were in the same room, but a low, persistent hum beneath her sternum, like a second heartbeat, like a thread pulled taut between 2 points, vibrating with distance. She could feel his pain. That was the part that frightened her. It came in waves, dull and distant during the day, sharper in the evenings before she went to him. By the time she arrived at his chambers each night, her own hands were trembling, and she couldn't tell anymore whether the trembling was hers or an echo of his. Every shifter knew about fated bonds, the pull, the recognition, the bone-deep certainty that this person was yours. But those bonds were for people who belonged somewhere, people with surnames and bloodlines and histories, not for foundlings left at village gates with no note and no name. Which was why the growing need to be near him, to touch him, to feel his wolf pressing toward hers, through his skin, couldn't possibly be what she thought it was. It couldn't. And yet her wolf, silent her entire life, was suddenly desperate. "You look tired," Soren observed one evening, as she settled at the edge of his bed with the book. "I'm fine," Thessaly said. "Shall I read?" He studied her for a moment longer than necessary. His gaze traced the shadows beneath her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers gripped the book's cover slightly too hard. "You don't have to do this every night." "Yes, I do." He frowned. "Why?" "Because your wolf is dying, and I can feel it. Because when I'm away from you, my chest hurts in a way I can't explain. Because I think about the sound you make when the pain finally stops, and it does something to my heart that I'm not equipped to handle. Because the book isn't going to restore itself," Thessaly said instead. "Now, lie down." Something softened in his expression. "You're very bossy for a bookbinder." "I'm very bossy for anyone," Thessaly replied. "It's one of my best qualities." He almost smiled. She saw it happen, the way his mouth changed shape for just a fraction of a second. The way his eyes warmed like clouds parting over gray water. It was gone before it fully formed, but she had seen it, and the sight of it lodged beneath her ribs like a splinter of light she would carry for days. She read to him. The text glowed beneath her fingers, brighter now than it had been the first night. The chapter on Threadkeeper bonds was becoming clearer as she restored more pages, and tonight the passage described what happened when the bond between a threadkeeper and her wolf deepened. The language grew more vivid, more urgent. "The threadkeeper must not merely ease the wolf's suffering," she translated slowly. "She must enter the wound itself. Follow the thread into the dark place where the wolf is caged. Only there, at the heart of the affliction, can the threadkeeper anchor the wolf and pull it free." Thessaly paused. The words felt heavy, prophetic, like they had been waiting 300 years for this exact moment, for her voice to speak them in this room, with this man. "Enter the wound," Soren repeated. "What does that mean?" "I think it means I have to go where your wolf is," Thessaly said carefully. "Inside you, into whatever space the curse has created." His reaction was immediate. He sat up, his body going rigid, his expression closing like a shutter being pulled down. "No. The book says. I don't care what the book says." His voice was sharp and sudden, and loud enough that Thessaly flinched. He saw it, and his jaw tightened, but he didn't soften. "You don't know what's in there, Thessaly. I do. I feel it every moment of every day. The thing that's killing my wolf. It isn't just a curse. It has weight, it has teeth. And I will not send you into that." Thessaly closed the book slowly. "What do you feel?" she asked quietly. "Tell me what's in there." The fire crackled. His hands gripped the edge of the mattress until his knuckles went white. "Ash," he said finally. His voice dropped low, stripped of everything but exhaustion, everything burning. "My wolf trapped in the center of it, bound and burning alive, and the dead standing around it, feeding the flames with everything I did wrong." He looked at her, and his eyes were raw open in a way she had never seen them. "If you go in there, it will try to take you too. It will use you against me, or me against you, and I cannot lose someone else. I can't. I have lost enough." The confession struck her like a physical blow. Not just the words, but the way his voice broke on the last syllable, the way his hands were shaking against the mattress, the way he looked at her like she was already gone. She reached for his hand. Her fingers closed around his, and the contact sent a pulse of warmth up her arm that resonated through her entire body. His wolf surged toward her touch, and she felt it press against his skin, raw and aching, and reaching for her, like a lifeline. "You're not going to lose me," Thessaly said. He pulled his hand free, the absence. "You're done," he said. His voice had gone flat and controlled, the king's voice, the one that gave orders and expected them obeyed without question. "Thank you for your help. It's no longer needed." Thessaly stared at him. You can't be serious. Cardin will escort you to your quarters. Don't come back. The words fell like stones into water. Thessaly felt each one hit and sink. Soren, his name came out before she could stop it. Not, Your Majesty, not Sire. Just his name, raw and desperate and far too intimate for what they were supposed to be. His eyes closed. The muscle in his jaw jumped. Go, he said. Please. Thessaly stood. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. She picked up the book and walked to the door. And with every step she felt the thread between them, stretch tighter, thinner, screaming with strain. She turned in the doorway. He was sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. This won't save you, she said, her voice thick with tears she refused to let fall. Sending me away. It won't save either of us. He didn't respond. Thessaly left, and the door closed behind her with a sound that felt like something breaking. The first 3 days were manageable. Thessaly threw herself into work, spending long hours in the lower archives, hands busy with pages that weren't his, books that didn't glow, text that meant nothing. She told herself this was fine. She told herself the ache behind her sternum was indignation, not loss. She told herself she was angry at a stubborn king who would rather die than accept help, and anger was a perfectly reasonable response. By the 4th day, she stopped being able to lie to herself. The ache had grown. It wasn't indignation, it was physical. A deep, grinding pressure beneath her sternum that worsened with every hour she spent away from him. Her wolf paced ceaselessly, whining at the edges of her consciousness, pressing against her ribs with increasing desperation. She could feel him. That was the worst part. Through whatever connection had formed between them during those evenings in his chambers, she could feel the shape of his pain even from across the palace. It came in waves. Some hours it was manageable, a dull background hum she could almost ignore. Other hours it spiked so sharply she had to grip the edge of her work table and breathe through her teeth until it passed. He was getting worse. She knew it the way. She knew her own heartbeat. His wolf was failing. The migraines started on the 5th day. Bright, blinding pain behind her eyes that sent her stumbling to her room with the curtains drawn. Lying in the dark with her hands pressed against her temples while her wolf howled inside her. Helene found her like that on the 6th morning, curled on her bed, pale and shaking, unable to eat the breakfast tray that had gone cold on her desk. You need to tell me what's happening, Helene said, sitting on the edge of the bed, with a healer's calm that Thessaly found simultaneously comforting and infuriating. I can feel him dying, Thessaly whispered. Every hour I can feel his wolf getting weaker. And there's nothing I can do, because he sent me away. Helene was quiet for a long moment. The bond is forming, child, whether either of you wants it or not. Your wolves have recognized each other. You are becoming his anchor, and he is becoming yours. And every day you spend apart is stretching that thread past what it can bear. He thinks he's protecting me, Thessaly said into her pillow. He is trying, Helene acknowledged, failing but trying. He is the most stubborn person alive. He is the second most stubborn person alive, Helene corrected gently. On the 7th day, she saw him. She was crossing the lower courtyard, carrying a stack of reference texts back to the archives, when she caught his scent on the wind, that deep, familiar warmth that made her wolf lurch forward so hard she stumbled. He was on the upper balcony, flanked by 2 advisors. Even from this distance, even through the harsh midday light, she could see what the week had done to him. His face was gaunt, the hollows beneath his cheekbones deeper than before. He stood with the careful stillness of someone holding himself upright through will alone. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor that made her stomach clench with fear. She looked up, he looked down. Their eyes met across the courtyard. For one suspended moment, the world went still. The ache in her chest flared into something so sharp and bright that it stole her breath. She felt his wolf reach for her from across the distance, felt it straining against the curse, desperate and failing and so tired. Then he looked away, deliberately, completely, turned his head and resumed speaking to his advisor, as though she were not there at all. Thessaly's vision blurred. She wasn't sure if it was tears or the migraine returning, and she didn't care. That afternoon, Carden summoned her to his office. She expected news about the arrangement. What she got was the king's full history, laid out in Carden's measured, unflinching voice, like a map of a country she had never been allowed to visit. The Greymark pack was not feral by choice, Carden said, leaning forward in his chair. They were infected, a corruption that spread through the pack bonds themselves, turning wolves against their own nature. By the time our scouts identified the source, nearly every member of the pack had turned. Thessaly's hands gripped the arms of her chair. The king ordered a containment, tried to isolate the corrupted wolves, treat them, find a cure. For 3 months he held the line, burning through resources, losing soldiers to raids from the corrupted wolves, while his council screamed at him to end it. Carden's voice remained steady, but his eyes were not. Then intelligence came in. The corruption was spreading beyond Greymark. 2 neighboring packs showed early signs. If it reached the lowland territories, thousands would turn, so he attacked, Thessaly whispered. He ordered the assault on Greymark, Carden confirmed. A full strike, overwhelming force. The intention was swift and decisive, to end the threat before it could spread further. He paused, but during the attack, the healers sent word. They had found something, a treatment. Not a cure, but a way to slow the corruption, possibly even reverse it in the early stages. Thessaly's blood went cold. They found a treatment during the battle? The message arrived 20 minutes after the assault began, Carden said. The king tried to recall his forces, sent riders, signal flares, everything he had. His jaw tightened. But an army in motion doesn't stop on command. The fighting was already inside the settlement walls. By the time the order reached the front lines, Greymark was burning. The silence that followed was suffocating. How many? Thessaly asked. Over 300, Carden said quietly. Men, women, elders, many of them in the early stages of corruption, many who might have been saved. Thessaly pressed her hand against her mouth. The elder Vela survived long enough to curse him, Carden continued. She looked him in the eye and told him his own wolf would know what it felt like to be consumed, that every day he would feel what her people felt, as the corruption took them, a slow death from the inside with no hope and no cure. Thessaly's eyes burned, and the curse holds, because he believes he deserves it. Carden looked at her sharply. What makes you say that? Because I know him, Thessaly said. And the words came out fierce and certain and aching. Because he is the kind of man who would carry 300 deaths on his shoulders and never set them down. Because he tried to stop it and couldn't, and he will never forgive himself for the 20 minutes that came too late. Carden was quiet for a long time. The treatment the healers found, he said finally. It worked. The neighboring packs were saved. Thousands lived because of the intelligence. Gathered during the Greymark assault, he met her eyes. The king knows this, it doesn't help. He cannot hear the number of lives saved over the screaming of the lives lost. Thessaly wiped her eyes. He's going to die if I don't go back to him. Yes, Carden said simply. And if he dies, the bond will take me with him, she added. Helene told me. Carden's expression flickered. Then you understand the situation fully. Thessaly stood. I understood it before she told me that. I didn't need a death sentence to know I wasn't going to let him go. She was halfway to the door when her vision went white. The floor tilted, sound became distant. She heard her name called from very far away, felt her knees buckle, felt the world go soft and dark and quiet. When she opened her eyes, she was in the infirmary, and Soren was beside her. He was kneeling on the stone floor next to her cot, his face ashen, his hands hovering over hers like he was afraid to touch her. When her eyes focused on him, the sound he made was not a word. It was something deeper, something that came from the part of him that was wolf, raw and anguished and desperately relieved. "You collapsed," he said. His voice was barely controlled. "In Carden's office. Your heart stopped for 6 seconds." Thessaly stared at him. "My heart stopped 6 seconds." His hands were shaking. "I felt it. Across the palace. I felt your heart stop, and I could not breathe until it started again." The implication of that settled over both of them. He had felt her heart stop. Through the bond, through the connection he had tried to sever by sending her away. "You can't keep doing this," Thessaly whispered. "You can't send me away and pretend it isn't killing us both." His jaw clenched. His eyes were bright with something she had never seen in them before. Fear, real fear. The kind that had nothing to do with curses or wars or dying wolves and everything to do with her. "I know," he said, and his voice broke. Helene came to see her that evening, after the king had been ushered away by Carden. The old woman sat beside the cot with the particular stillness she adopted when she was about to say something Thessaly would not want to hear. "I need to be honest with you, child," Helene began. "The bond between you and the king is incomplete, unfinished, and an unfinished bond under this kind of strain is dangerous." "I know," Thessaly said. "If the king dies, the incomplete bond will pull you after him. Not immediately, but within weeks, your wolf will follow his into silence." Helene's voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "You can still walk away. Leave the palace, put distance between yourself and the king, and the unfinished bond will eventually fade. You would survive." Thessaly looked at the ceiling. She thought about the courtyard, about his face across the distance, about the way he had looked away from her. She thought about his wolf, reaching for her in the dark, dying and desperate, and so tired. "No," Thessaly said. "Child." I said no. Thessaly sat up, ignoring the dizziness. "I'm not leaving him. I'm not walking away, so I can survive while he dies alone, with 300 ghosts feeding the fire that's killing him." Helene closed her eyes briefly. "You love him." It wasn't a question, and Thessaly didn't treat it as one. She didn't answer because the answer was so obvious it would have been insulting to say it aloud. "He won't let you back in willingly," Helene said. "You know that." "Then I'll go back in. Unwillingly," Thessaly said. "His unwillingness, not mine." She found Carden in the corridor outside the infirmary, as though he had been waiting. "The king has refused to see you," Carden said before she could speak. "He's ordered the guards not to admit you to his chambers." "Of course he has," Thessaly muttered. Carden studied her. "What do you intend to do?" "Go to his chambers, walk past his guards, and refuse to leave until he stops being a noble, self-sacrificing fool." Carden's mouth twitched. It was the first time she had ever seen his face move in that direction. "His guards are loyal," Carden said. "They won't disobey a direct order." "Then help me," Thessaly said. "You know he needs me. You've known it since the first night in the archives." The beta was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and produced a key. "This opens the side entrance to his chambers, the one the servants use." He held it out to her. "I can't be seen helping you. If the king asks, you stole it." Thessaly took the key. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Carden said. "Convince him." She waited until the palace had gone quiet, until the corridors were empty, and the torches burned low, and the only sounds were the wind against the stone walls and her own racing heartbeat. The servants' door was small and unassuming, hidden behind a tapestry at the end of the east wing corridor. The key turned smoothly. The door opened without a sound. The king's chambers were dark, except for the fire, burning low in the grate. She could see his silhouette by the window, standing the way he always stood when the pain was bad. Rigid, braced, staring at nothing. He turned when he heard her step on the stone floor. For a moment, he didn't seem to believe what he was seeing. "You can't be here," he said. And yet, Thessaly closed the door behind her. He moved toward her, then stopped like he was fighting his own body for control of his legs. "How did you get in?" "I ordered the guards, Soren." She said his name, and watched it hit him like something physical. His chest expanded. His hands clenched at his sides. "Stop sending me away. I'm trying to protect you," he said, and the words came out rough and fractured. "You're killing us both," Thessaly replied, stepping closer. "I felt your pain for 7 days. I felt your wolf dying. My heart stopped, Soren. For 6 seconds, my heart stopped, because the bond between us is breaking, under the weight of you refusing to let me help." He made a sound that was closer to a growl than a word. "That is exactly why you should run." She stepped closer, close enough to feel his warmth, to smell the pine and iron, to feel the pull between them vibrating like a plucked string. "I'm not running, Thessaly." Her name was a warning and a plea. "I know about Greymark," she said. "Carden told me everything. The corruption, the treatment that came 20 minutes too late, the 300 people who might have been saved." She saw him flinch, saw the devastation move across his face like a shadow. "I know what's feeding your curse, and I know why you think you deserve it." "You don't understand," he whispered. "I understand perfectly," Thessaly said. "You can't forgive yourself for being 20 minutes too late, so you've decided the punishment fits. Your wolf dies the way their wolves died, a slow consumption. No mercy, no relief." Her voice cracked. "But you're wrong. And if you die carrying that guilt, it won't bring them back. It won't honor them. It will just be one more life wasted." He stared at her. His defenses were crumbling. She could see it in his eyes, the way the walls shook. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay with me. Let me in." "If I let you in," he said, his voice barely audible, "I won't be able to let you go." "Good," Thessaly said, and kissed him. The moment her lips touched his, the bond between them blazed. She felt it like a fire igniting in her chest, golden and fierce and undeniable. His hands came up to cup her face, trembling against her skin, and the sound he made against her mouth was surrender. He kissed her back with a desperation that took her breath, his arms wrapped around her, pulling her against him, and she could feel his wolf surging forward, pressing against his skin, reaching for her with everything it had left. "I can't lose you," he said, between kisses, his forehead pressed against hers. "I cannot survive losing one more person." "Then stop pushing me away," Thessaly replied, pulling him closer. He held her against him, his arms wrapped tight, his face buried in her hair, and the bond between them blazed brighter with every breath they shared. The fire cast shifting light across the walls, and the book on the bedside table glowed faintly, amber light pulsing like a heartbeat. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, foreheads pressed together, breathing the same air. And when the mating bite came, it was instinctive and certain. Thessaly felt his teeth graze her neck, felt the bond snap into place, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting her entire life to be opened. She marked him back, pressed her mouth to the place where his shoulder met his neck, and claimed him as hers. The bond flared golden and complete, connecting them at a depth that went beyond bodies, beyond wolves, beyond anything she had words for. They held each other afterward, tangled and breathless, his face pressed against her temple. She could feel his wolf through the bond. Now clearly, a presence that was wounded and weak, but no longer alone. No longer dying in the dark without anyone to hold on to. "I've got you," Thessaly whispered. Soren's arms tightened around her. He fell asleep holding her, his breathing deep and steady, his face peaceful against her shoulder. Thessaly pressed her lips to his temple and closed her eyes. She woke in a burning forest. The air was made of ash. It filled her lungs with every breath, hot and acrid, tasting of charred wood and grief. The trees around her were not trees, or they had been once, but now they were columns of ember, skeletal shapes glowing orange and black, burning from the inside out without ever collapsing. The ground beneath her bare feet was warm. Not painfully so, but warm in the way. Dying things are warm, the last heat before the cold. Thessaly turned in a slow circle. The forest stretched in every direction, burning silently. No crackle, no roar. The fire consumed everything without sound, and the silence was somehow worse than screaming. "Soren!" she called out, and her voice fell flat against the ash-thick air. She walked forward. The bond beneath her ribs thrummed, pulling her deeper into the burning forest, and she followed it because there was nothing else to follow. She found him in a clearing at the heart of it. He was on his knees. Not the king who commanded armies, not the alpha whose presence filled rooms, just a man, stripped of everything but his grief, kneeling on ground that was slowly turning to ash beneath him. And before him, bound in chains of dark fire, was his wolf. Thessaly's breath left her in a rush that was closer to a sob. The wolf was enormous, beautiful even in its suffering. Its fur, the color of storm clouds, shot through with silver. But the chains that held it were alive. Dark tendrils of flame that wrapped around its legs, its chest, its throat, burning slowly inward, consuming it by inches. The wolf's eyes were open. They were gray, the same gray as Soren's, and the pain in them was bottomless. Surrounding the clearing, standing in the burning trees like mourners at a funeral that never ended, were the dead, hundreds of them. Men and women and elders, their faces blank with accusation, their mouths moving in unison. They spoke in whispers that fed the dark fire, and Thessaly could hear the words. Now hear what they were saying. "You were 20 minutes too late. You could have waited. You could have held the line longer. Our wolves burned from the inside. Now yours will too. This is what you earned." Thessaly felt Soren's guilt through the bond, a crushing avalanche of shame and sorrow, so vast it nearly drove her to her knees beside him. The curse wasn't attacking him from the outside. It was feeding on what was already inside. His own conviction that he deserved this, his own belief that 300 deaths required a payment in kind. The fire burned brighter with every whispered accusation, and the chains around his wolf tightened. "Soren," Thessaly said, dropping beside him. She reached for his face. He was cold, ice cold, despite the fire. His eyes were fixed on the wolf, on the chains, on the slow, terrible consumption that he watched every night without flinching because he believed it was his due. "You think you deserve this," Thessaly said, and her voice shook with the effort of speaking through his grief. "That's why the curse won't break. Because you agree with it. You signed the sentence yourself, and every night you come here and watch it carried out." The dead pressed closer. Their whispers grew louder. 20 minutes! They chanted. Thessaly stood. She turned to face them, these ghosts made from guilt, these echoes of a war that had ended 2 years ago but would never end inside his mind. "He tried to save you," she said, and her voice cut through the whispers like a blade. "He held the line for 3 months while everyone told him to attack. He burned through every resource, lost soldiers, destroyed his reputation with his own council, all because he believed you could be saved." The dead didn't stop. Their mouths kept moving. "And when the treatment came 20 minutes late, it broke him?" Thessaly continued, tears streaming down her face. "It broke him because he cared, because he saw you as people, not threats, because he would have given anything for those 20 minutes back." She turned to Soren. "But you can't have them back. No one can. And punishing yourself won't resurrect the dead. It will just add one more body to the count." He looked at her. His eyes were raw, destroyed. "I gave the order," he said. "I sent them in. Because if you hadn't, thousands more would have been lost," Thessaly said. "The corruption was spreading. You made an impossible choice in an impossible moment, and the treatment arrived 20 minutes too late. And that is a tragedy, not a crime. A tragedy." "It doesn't feel like a tragedy," Soren whispered. "It feels like murder." Thessaly knelt in front of him and took his face in her hands. "I know," she said. "I know it does. And I know that feeling won't go away just because I tell you it should. She pressed her forehead against his. I was left at a village gate as a baby. No note, no name, no reason. And for my whole life I believed it was because I wasn't worth keeping, that if I had been better, they would have stayed. His eyes focused on her sharp and present for the first time. But that isn't true, Thessaly said. I know that now. I wasn't abandoned because I was worthless. I was abandoned because the world is complicated and cruel and sometimes things happen that aren't anyone's fault. She stroked his cheek with her thumb. You are not a monster, Soren. You are a man who tried to save everyone and couldn't. And you are allowed to grieve that without letting it consume you. The dead had gone quiet. You are allowed to put this down, Thessaly whispered. Let them rest. Let your wolf rest. Let yourself rest. The silence held for a long, terrible, infinite moment. Then Soren reached up and wrapped his hands around hers. His grip was crushing. His body shook with the force of something breaking loose inside him, something that had been locked in place for 2 years. I'm sorry, he said. Not to her. To them. To the dead standing in the burning trees, watching, with empty faces. I'm sorry, I was 20 minutes too late. I'm sorry, I couldn't save you. I'm sorry. The fire dimmed, one by one. The chains around the wolf loosened, dissolved, fell away like ash. The dead turned. Slowly, without sound, they walked into the trees and disappeared. The flames guttered, then died, leaving only darkness and silence and the faint, impossible scent of green things growing. The wolf lifted its head. It looked at Thessaly with those gray eyes, and the sound it made was not pain, it was recognition. Thessaly reached out and touched its muzzle. The wolf pressed into her hand, warm and alive and breathing. The thread between them blazed golden, and the forest dissolved into light. She woke in his arms, in his bed. In the warm amber firelight of his chambers, Soren was awake beside her. Tears ran down his face, but he was smiling. A broken, beautiful, real smile. He pulled her closer, pressed his lips to her forehead, and held her as the last echoes of the burning forest faded from them both. Thank you, he whispered. Thessaly smiled back through her own tears and buried her face against his chest. The curse did not break cleanly. There were still nights when Soren woke gasping, still hours when the phantom fire burned behind his eyes and the guilt pressed in from every side. But Thessaly was there. Every night, her hand in his, her voice in the dark, her steady presence, anchoring his wolf to something the curse could no longer reach. His wolf grew stronger, slowly, unevenly, with setbacks that left them both exhausted, but it grew. The gray pallor left his skin. The bruises beneath his eyes faded. The constant grinding pain that had defined his existence for 2 years receded into something manageable, then something occasional, then something that visited only in dreams and left before morning. You're healing, Helene told him, and she sounded almost annoyed about it, the way she sounded when the universe proved her right. The court's reaction was predictable. A nameless bookbinder, bonded to the Alpha King, was not what the nobility had envisioned. The whispers followed Thessaly everywhere, sharp and persistent, and some days they stung more than she let anyone see. But Soren stood beside her with the quiet, immovable certainty of a man who had decided something and would not be moved. They can adjust, he told her one morning, tracing the mating mark on her neck with his thumb. Or they can leave. The auction book was fully restored now. Thessaly had finished the final pages in the weeks after the curse broke, and what she found in the last chapter made her sit very still for a very long time. The handwriting in the letter matched a name referenced in the book's final passage. A threadkeeper, unnamed but described in careful detail, who had known what her daughter would become and had hidden the only map that could guide her. Thessaly held the letter, faded and fragile, and understood for the first time that she had not been abandoned. She had been planted, like a seed in a book waiting for the right hands to find her. On a quiet morning, months later, Thessaly woke to pale light filtering through the curtains. Soren was still asleep beside her. His face was peaceful, his breathing deep, his arm draped across her waist. No nightmares, no fire, no ghosts. She watched him for a moment, warmth spreading through her, and felt the bond between them hum with something that needed no words. Then she settled back against his shoulder, closed her eyes, and let the morning hold them both.